the experiences that we've gone through in the last 6 years of Sitecore development and trying to figure out the way on how we bring it from the local computer to the production site. Sharing a bit of automation stuff with you, and it's not about the marketing automation of Sitecore. So first, maybe to be a bit in the topic again, I'll introduce you to one of the probably many maturity models that are out there. That's the one I like best, and it has a lot of information on it. After that, I'm showing you some receipts for failure on your journey. If you like to fail, that's where you have to listen. And I'll introduce you to our best friend at Unique. It's Bob. It's from Bob the Builder. Some are nodding. That's the one guys that are working on a Swiss tourism project, I guess. So yeah, it's Bob Open Build. A lot of the experiences that we've made through our journey have been implemented in that framework. And last but not least, I would like to also maybe give you an introduction to the Sitecore installation framework. So show hands who has already installed a Sitecore 9 instance locally. Not too many. So okay, that's good. So let's start with the theory. Well, okay, it's way too small to read that, but that's not an issue. You can look that up for yourself later if you want to see all the details. The important part is basically that there is different stages. So we're in the Sitecore world, so we all know maturity models. Sitecore likes them very much for marketers. Here's one for developers. So it starts with the base where you don't really have automation, and it ends up in the expert level where you have a fully automated deployment. And I just picked up the highlights that I think are worth looking at to see where you are. By the way, these are just lanes that are focusing on different aspects of the automation. So for example, up here is culture and organization. Then there's design and architecture, build and deploy, test and verification, and information and reporting. So, and I'd like to point out is library management and version control of database changes. Well, that's easy with Sitecore with the serialized items, right? And the library management, that's what they refer to when they talk about something like NuGet. So you have a package management in place. That's really the beginner mode. Something else in the beginner mode is automatic integration tests. But well, that's not really the case for all the projects, right? And then in intermediate mode, we have an automated tag and versioning process in place. Who is doing automated tagging and versioning on the source level? Yeah, still a couple do that. Cool. And there are automatic triggered builds, of course, to do continuous integration. Then in the advanced level, it's probably going to be quite a complex automation process already, so you have to focus on that technology and manage that technology well. And that requires you to have a dedicated tools team, or at least some specialists that really know well about those parts that you've automated because you've scripted a lot, I guess. And the expert level, I like that very much. The zero-touch continuous deployment is probably when you then have the voice-enabled bot and just call deploy. So so of course your mileage may vary. That's what I would like to show you with this slide. You don't have to go all in to do automation, but you can start small and continuously improve on your process. So yeah, we've gone through a lot of those, did some trial and error and also failed. And I'd like to point out some receipts that you really might make you fail. Yeah, obviously, yeah, automate it all at once. That's great. No, it's not. So the thing is, your first approach is probably not the best. So you're going to adapt and rearrange and change anyway. So don't even try to automate everything at once in a huge project, but try to start at one place and move on from that. Second, if you do everything at once, you're also going to invest a lot of time, and wherever you're going to invest a lot of time, it's very hard to move away from that again, because you've already invested a lot of time, so you think you're keep going, but you're maybe already on the wrong journey. And of course, maintenance is really going to be expensive and also time consuming. If you're new to what you try to automate, because you do have so many changes in that automated process. So what you should aim for is automation in iterations. So I've said that a couple of times now. Start small and keep improving. And also, what's very important is that you try to decouple the automation parts and processes into smaller pieces, so that you can really distinguish what part of the process that you have from your local machine to production that you want to automate, and don't try to make dependencies on the pieces that you're automating. Because actually, if you have one huge dependency, you're building up a big monolith. So that was actually, to be honest, our first try. We started in Visual Studio, then we thought, well, we didn't have NuGet packages for the DLLs from Sitecore, so we write the copy tasks to copy all our DLLs into the web route. Okay, now we do have that, but what about the configurations? Okay, we have to do another MS build task and maybe manage configurations, and we added up to those features all in the same monolithic architectural script, basically, which ended up in a huge unmanageable collection of pieces doing some part of automation. Yeah, that's really like very concrete, so I might be a bit biased, but yeah, don't use MS Build. You're going to fail. It has really a bad development environment, but I don't have to tell you that. I guess everybody knows, and has touched MS Build before, and it's really hard to debug and clumsy XML that you have to handle. Of course, it knows tasks, yes, but there are better alternatives today, and please have a look at them. So maybe you know Sitecore, don't know, anybody? Sitecore is a PowerShell-based task system, task runner. It's actually a generic framework, so not specific for Sitecore. There's another one, and maybe you know that URL. It's of course the repository of Cam Fichi, former MVP, now Sitecore employee, and author of Unicorn, the serialization tool. So he has also written a nice framework. It's called Beaver, and it's also task-based, and it allows you to configure pipelines in PowerShell tasks to then run your automation. Gulp is, of course, the favorite tool of any front-end developers, and it is also heavily used in Habitat. So I guess you've all set up Habitat at least once, and try to figure out how to have those NPM dependencies loaded in and run all those copy DLL, copy whatever tasks. So yeah, not sure if I'm really a fan of that system, but it's very generic and it works out well, and it seems to work for the whole community. I don't know, has anybody used the Habitat way up to production? with Gulp. Cool, okay. So that worked for you? Yeah, okay. Very nice, because that's what I would then really urge. So if you use Gulp, don't just use it on your local machine, but use the tasks that you require through the whole process and use them up to the production deployments. Then, well, we'll talk later about the Sitecore installation framework. It's definitely a tool that is really just now focusing on installing Sitecore, very similar to what you have may known from the SIM, Sitecore Installation Manager, it's called, I guess. So one is UI based, and you can click through, download the solution, and install it into your web root, and you have a plain vanilla installation. The Sitecore installation framework on the first try does basically the same thing, just for Sitecore 9, and it's based on PowerShell. But it is way more, well, not more extensible, but extensible on PowerShell technology. And it can be used for more than just installing the Sitecore. And you could also have a look at Bob OpenBuild, but we come to that later. So yeah, if you think local environments and productions are two totally different worlds, it's probably not that good, because please, if you repeat stuff, working on your local machine and need a similar process on production, use the same tooling for it. Why should you do that? It's because then your process is going to be consistent. Wherever you're using it, you're always using the same tooling, and you do not introduce bugs on production deployments that you didn't have on local deployments. One example to give you here is maybe for the configuration management. So I was already consulting on a project where they had different search providers in place. They mentioned, oh well, I don't have a local Solar installation, so we're just using the Lucene provider, and we're using Solar just from the stage integration to production. And they constantly, after deployment, had issues with their search queries because the link queue provider in the content search API does not really exactly every time translate the queries the same way if you use Solar or use Lucene, so it's not interchangeable. You should really use the same environment on your local machine as you're using on production. And yeah, some other issues I've already seen in real life is actually that the developers are installing Sitecore with SIM, so they just install a vanilla instance and then they publish their Visual Studio solution to it. But when they deploy to production, they check out the source code on a CI server, create a package for their solution, and install Sitecore from another repository, because there they had customizations and they're not using them locally. So that's also obviously a process that is going to fail. So it's not really, well, it's obvious maybe, but with Sitecore it's not really easy, not always really easy to just keep exactly the same process on installing Sitecore as a distribution locally and also installing then the merged result of your solution and the Sitecore distribution on a production server. So something that's obvious for other products isn't for Sitecore. Yes, if you have no plan for versioning, that's also a problem for automation usually. And by the way, versioning helps for so many other things, also communication with the team and with the customer, etc. So what you should aim for is really the automated versioning. Best is if it's on the CI server, I guess, and it also includes the versioning of the IaaS. So if you do have a mess somewhere, which should not happen in the structured process, that you can really check the versions on the DLLs and not just some packages around the DLLs. So we found it really helpful to follow as much as possible semantic versioning. Do I have to explain something about semantic versioning, or are you familiar with that concept? Basically 3 digits, major, minor, patch, and you iterate whenever possible on the compatibility layer, which is minor, hotfixes on patch level, and the major version for breaking changes, right? And to support the semantic versioning pattern, we're using a widely known workflow on Git, which is called Git flow, which also makes it a bit easier to see when you create a release what's happening. Is it a minor version bump, or if it's a hotfix, it's a patch version upgrade. So we are sticking to Git flow for most of the projects. Of course, there are other nice Git workflows. So I would just recommend that you use one of the very popular ones, and not your own obscure branch naming that you have to explain to every developer you onboard. Yeah, so it should be obvious, right? And it can also be a very straightforward workflow, like the Git flow workflow, where you just have a mainline development on a master branch and create feature branches and pull requests directly back to the master. That would be a very simple but still obvious use case, workflow, because master is where it all ends up and the rest is features, so I don't have to care that much about the features. But if you have something like the master branch and the development branch and not the develop branch, and then a lot of other namings for unstable and stable, and then it's after 2 or 3 months going to be a huge mess, and you cannot orient yourself on even checkout of the project. And yeah, NuGet is a bit picky on the versioning, so make sure that while you're automating the process, you probably hit some bumps there, and you have to figure out that NuGet, if you're doing pre-release versions, you cannot use more than something around 20 to 25 characters. So if you're using your super long feature branch names, it's probably going to fail while creating NuGet packages. But of course, I would like to see that you're creating NuGet packages also based on the automated versioning. To do all that, we use Git version. Anybody knows Git version? It's executable. It's an open source tool, and it calculates the version based on your Git workflow, which is amazing. So if you tag a version in your Git repository, it picks that tag up. It can also read your commit comments if you would like to override something. It also knows release branches and hotfix branches. So it's really amazing. And what it does is then it creates really nice and properly named versions of your builds. So this is just a screenshot of TeamCity, one of our projects. And basically it's just Git version, the executable running as one step on the build, executing in place of the repository, and then calculating its version and sending this back to TeamCity. TeamCity picks the variable up and displays it nicely. So yeah, to sum it all up, if you only the only tool you have is a hammer, you probably every problem looks like a nail. So yeah, just try to figure out. There's so many tools out there. Try to figure out which tool suits best for you, and try to be flexible on that. Any questions up to that point? Okay, so I'll show you some of the machines of Bob Open Build tooling. It's actually a now open sourced toolkit that we use at Unic. So what are Bob's concepts and practices? You've seen a lot of them, or all, I guess. So we're using Git flow for the advantages that I've mentioned already, and base our work on semantic versioning as much as possible. Nobody is perfect, so of course it's also a nice discussion, what is semantic versioning adoption to Sitecore? So when is something a breaking change and when is it just a minor change? But I think your team will figure out. And regarding Sitecore, that's also important that we do have some assumption with that tooling in place. So for example, the source is managed outside of the web root, and we use Visual Studio Publishing and have not the solution inside the web root where the IIS is pointing to. So basically this is Habitat style. And yeah, we try to strictly keep just the things under source control which we really changed or customized. So there are no Sitecore TLLs checked in the version control system or any other unchanged Sitecore files. Of course, we do have Sitecore files in the under version control. These are the files that we had to change because of, for example, support TLLs, fixes, whatever. But don't commit the support TLLs. Use NuGet for that. But that's another story. And we use, of course, an item serialization. You could use TDS. We think Unicorn is great for that, especially in version 4 with a YAML format, because you can really see what you merge. Don't have to look at obscure serialization formats, but readable text files. So then, this is basically the big picture, how we try our journey around the code cycle. So we work here on our machines using Git as a versioning tool. TeamCity picks up all the commits and all the pull requests, and also does merge builds of the pull requests to validate if it still works after merging. We push everything to NuGet. Well, this is really handy with TeamCity. Of course, you can use any CI server. They're just, some are more capable than others. So we like TeamCity, and it also provides us with the NuGet feed, which is really comfortable. So you can just create the artifacts as a NuGet package, and they are automatically available on the feed. And yeah, the NuGet packages also get published to Octopus Deploy, which I think is the go-to solution for any deployment tasks. Why not deploy with TeamCity? You could script that, right? But then how do you distinguish between the stages? And maybe you should have gates there, so maybe you should control that you can only deploy versions to production that have been successfully installed on integration or test. Or acceptance, or whatever your naming is. So that's not something that any CI server is doing for you. You would have to script that all on yourself, but actually Octopus Deploy is really made for that. It also provides you with secure access to any production system without opening some holes into firewalls. Well, you do have firewall configuration issues. There are two modes that Octopus Deploy can talk with a target through a tentacle. It's either an active connection, then you have to fiddle around with the firewall, which most of the firewall guys don't like that much. The other one is the polling, where the target, the production server, actually polls Octopus Deploy server and asks, is there something to deploy? Is there something to deploy? And that's the way we've set up Octopus Deploy tentacles for most. And yeah, then there's the other, on the big picture, the other important thing. Of course, you do have different configurations for all the stages that you're going through. Now, it's always a bit a pain to manage all those configurations because they are environment dependent, and they, at least with us, for most parts, it's like with the Sitecore roles, like some specific configurations on the environment just are different from local to production, whatever, and it's really hard to test them, almost as hard as setting up Sitecore delivery roles versus management roles or all the other roles that you have out there. Yeah, so to be honest, most of the testing, if we have a configuration change for a URL on production, it just happens on production. So yeah. Now, I like this slide because it has a lot of nice logos on it, but it's a bit a mess. But you might see this guy. It's Bob the Builder, and actually was the reason for the naming of the Bob Open Build acronym for us. We thought it's a nice, super easy analogy to see that Bob the Builder is building stuff with the machines, so we are doing the same thing. So we figured out that we need a lot of machines connecting all the standard tools that we are using. For example, we have Scoop. He works in the Visual Studio environment and also on some other places, configures our IaaS web server, attaches databases, hooks up unicorn synchronization, etc. We have Mook. Mook is automatically publishing everything that we have on build, also living in the Visual Studio. And another very small machine is Benny. It's basically a file watcher. Is anybody using a file watcher with Sitecore to automatically move files from the solution path to the webroot path, for example, for CSS files, or, well, they're now SAS files for most of the time, but for XML, for configs, no file watchers. Because there have been a couple of projects also in the Sitecore community, I think about 3 of them, writing file watchers to exactly this, so we have our own, I guess. And yeah, there are a lot of other machines. I will not go into the details of these. Well, you see TeamCity also here in the center, so it's obviously an important part of our stack. You could change it to anything else. The machines would still be compatible, and that's exactly the good thing with having machines separated with different concerns. For example, we had Dodger working on the TeamCity, creating courier packages, basically picking up the serialized items, packaging them in an update package, then ship it to Octopus deploy, and then having Lofty pushing them to ship, which is another open source Sitecore project. It accepts update packages, Sitecore update packages to install them. But now we don't use Courier anymore because we can use Unicorn up to production and just import it with deserialize the data with Unicorn. We didn't do that, or we're not 100% able to do that with Unicorn version 2, I guess that was by that time. So we needed some other ways and had this one. But now that we don't use this one anymore, we just kill the features in Dodger and everything else works. We also, what did we do? We changed some other things as well already. Well, we have basically one machine which is producing all the NuGet packages for us based on what Sitecore provides. So Sitecore up to version 8 provides a zip file to download, and there's a bunch of DLLs in it, and we would like to have those DLLs in a NuGet feed, but just recently, I think it's 1 year now, Sitecore introduced their own NuGet feed, but before that, we provided ourselves with a NuGet feed. So we just had packers, some PowerShell scripts creating NuGet packages of every DLL, and we were good to go. And now that Sitecore provides us with that, we just cross out the feature on Packer for that. We don't use it anymore. And we hope we can get rid of another thing that Packer does. It still has to take this distribution file. It's now the WDP. It was the zip file. What can we do with a zip file? Nothing. We need a NuGet file, so we package that up in a NuGet, put a nice versioning on it with Sitecore 8.2. The revision, I guess, and some build information, and then we were able to reference that in the project as well and could install it. So hopefully at one point in time Sitecore also provides us with the full Sitecore installation package in another way than a zip file, and not sure if is already the solution there. So yeah, the machines in detail. I think I'm going to show you that in a minute, so no more slides for that. You see, Scoop is actually doing a lot that also the Sitecore installation framework is now doing, or things that the SIM has done. So it configures your IAS, it registers the domain in the host file, it also creates certificates for you if you have an HTTPS site. It installs Sitecore. Well, this is basically just extracting from the zip or the NuGet package that we have into the web root. It also attaches plain vanilla databases, synchronizes the items. Of course, it uses Unicorn for that. And it does a bunch of web config transforms. So a lot of tasks that we've implemented in Scoop, we can get rid of them and just try to integrate with SIF, and we're done. And from then on, we don't have to worry about that part, because now it's Sitecore's job to make local certification, registration stuff work. And yeah, MOOC, I'm not talking much about MOOC. I'm showing you that in a minute. It's already actually ready for Sitecore 9 as far as we know, and so I'm skipping this, but there's something about configuration management which is a bit special, I found, so I have to tell you that. We have quite a mess with include configs in up to version 8 of Sitecore. I guess you've realized that by now, that they, basically probably did not really understand what they've implemented and just added their configs. So it's quite a mess with those alphabetically recursive inclusion of all the configuration files, which is actually a very great feature, but it's now very hard to keep them clean and working when you have different roles in Sitecore, and then you add your own customizations to it, and maybe you have custom configurations that should only work for one environment, etc. So we came up with the concept of roles and environments. So basically exactly what Sitecore now introduced with Sitecore 9. And another very awkward thing that you may have noticed, and the guys from Swiss Tourism are smiling, you can give feedback on that. Would you like to explain it? So basically, well, you can basically ignore the numbers. What important is you have the roles and you have the environments. So local is an environment, like dev is one, integration and prod is an environment. Then we have roles like author and delivery. And we can have combinations of both. So we can have a dev author configuration item. These are folders, right? So if you would like to have a configuration, maybe defining the domain name for the website, you're going to add it to, well, maybe base or unique or whatever here you have globally. Then you have their www.unique.com, but now you have integration, so it's not working. You have to override it. Okay, I have to speed up a bit. So then you're probably going to overwrite that configuration somewhere else, or you just put it on the prod delivery. That's where you have the www.unic.com, and you add the author.unic.com on the prod author environment, etc. So you can really quite easily, by convention, see where your configuration will be applied. And if you have looked into Sitecore 9, Sitecore 9 is basically doing exactly the same thing. They have a rules-based configuration system, and it works inline. They also have introduced layers. So now the include folder is pretty clean, and you can add your own configurations there. So they also solved that problem, and they solved it in a different way. So you could now pick both ways and see what fits best. So what I'd like to do now is show you some of the toolings in action. Of course, we have a configuration file. I do have cloned a standard Habitat solution. And the configuration is done. Oh, it's way too small, so I have to zoom in. Is that better? So what you can see is we have the main version of Sitecore. Of course, we picked the version from our NuGet server so that we install the correct version, which is then done through the PowerShell command line. Now I'm showing you some of the productive features of MOOC. I'm just creating a standard new file somewhere. It's in the Sitecore common website. Add some command here. So save it, and if I build it now, basically what MOOC does, it hooks into the targets. I misspelled, I know, and automatically publishes the build. So the thing that you would normally do by then go to publish and use your publish target, or using some gulp tasks maybe, if you're using Habitat, is done by hooking into the MS build process, and it's now already in my web folder. So it's this one. I can open it. I see, yeah, it's Hello World. If I'm going to change this in Studio and save it, let's see if Benny didn't die during all the restarts. It died. So let's see. Benny is not here. Yeah, so it's immediate, right? I did not build, I didn't do anything, it just silently copied everything to the web root. So, and everything, all I did for that was basically adding the Bob config, of course, to provide Mark and Benny with some configuration information, and installed the NuGet packages. So that's also kind of a big story for us right now, because I'm still quite busy with open sourcing, because we do have a lot of machines and a lot to document. But as you can see, this is the public nuget.org feed, and we have by now published almost all machines. Some of them you don't have to care, they're just dependent to other machines. So we have machines for machines, which is crazy. And of course, if you go to the unique repository on GitHub, you can also You could contribute, which would be great. Each project is also having its own build, and we're using AppWare for this. So what you can see here is now Benny, the start page. The projects look all quite similar. By the way, AppWare is not a very great build system. As you can see, it's all web-based as a service. And every machine comes also with a documentation where you have all the APIs if you would like to hook into the commands, and some usage examples, etc. And an introduction, of course. So yeah, that was the demo time, and these are the details for all the bot machines. So you can see next will be something about Sitecore installation framework, but I'm thinking of closing now, maybe opening discussion because time is up, I guess, right? Couple of more minutes, okay. So, okay. So I've, as you told me, some of you have already looked into the Sitecore installation framework. So what can I say about the Sitecore installation framework? A very quick introduction to it. It's a PowerShell-based collection of installation scripts, basically, and it supports, it's a task-based framework, so it supports you to add new tasks to it. You can extend it with whatever steps you would like it to do, other than installing Sitecore, installing Solar, creating certificates. I've seen contributions already. I think some guys are from Poland contributing to that. Are they in the room here? No? Okay. Some colleagues of you doing some nice work there, and also a lot of, some others contributing also tasks already, for example, setting up Solar in an easier way, etc.
There's a new thing. I'm not sure if it's already published, but it will be possible to install older version of Sitecore with zip.
Yeah, it's the Sitecore install extensions project from your colleagues, right? Yeah, I've seen that, and that's going to be definitely something looking forward to. Yeah, so how, well, what are the concepts behind it? So one important thing is that we have tasks that we can use to extend Sitecore installation framework. That's how a task looks like. This task creates the website, obviously. So it has just, this is basically the ID of the task. And then it has some parameters, and we'll see how those parameters and variables and things are calculated later on. So you can pass in parameters and variables to configure at runtime what the task should do. And obviously, create website should create the application pool for you and register the IIS. I don't know, maybe it does some more details in it. An important thing is that tasks are run in sequence. So they're in one large JSON. Well, the JSON is as large as you would like it to have, as many tasks as you want, and you have to make sure that the sequence is the correct. You can skip sequences by calling Sitecore install Sitecore configuration. That's the commandlet you're using to install it effectively, passing in a configuration file, and you can skip some of the tasks if you wish. If you don't tell the script to skip some of the tasks, it just takes all the tasks. The other important concept is parameters. Well, parameters is just that what you know from PowerShell. It's what you pass in on the command line when you call the install Sitecore configuration. Then you can everything that you've defined as a parameter in the JSON file will then you'll be able to override. You can provide default values in the configuration file, but these values can be overridden by calling the installation. The third important concept of the framework is variables, and variables are somehow a mix between the tasks and the parameters, I guess. So what they are, they're values that are calculated within the configuration file itself. And variables can reference parameters and can use other variables. Plus, every variable can call config functions to operate on the variables, on the values of variables and values of parameters. So in this example here, what we see is a variable called sql.database.master, and it calls a concat function, which is then a so-called config function. And it concatenates a parameter referenced here with that static value of underline master. The parameter is the SQLDB prefix, so that's what you can configure and give into the script. What's not shown here is that you can also reference some other variables. So, but I think you figured that one out. And yeah, you can also see that there's some convention in the naming. So invoke concat config function is actually that concat function that is used here. And there's a bunch of other config functions already provided by Sitecore in the installation. So yeah, basically that's the main work that we are doing now is working how to make Bob and his machines compliant with Sitecore 9. And obviously, as you have already seen, what that means is that we should get rid of a lot of custom implementations that we've done, like registering host file, creating application pools, managing certificates, because we're really happy that Sitecore does this, because it's a lot of work to maintain. So what we try to do is basically fully depend on the Sitecore installation framework and deprecate all those functions that are redundant, but also provide a nice Visual Studio integration, something of the sort that you've seen now. Well, you've just seen me initializing Benny. Everything else was not even an interaction, but that's basically the PowerShell command line in Visual Studio, and we're using it for quite a lot of tasks. I think something like install Sitecore in that command line, respecting some specific configurations of the Bob config to dynamically install through SIF. That's what we are aiming for, and then have a reproducible process that we can use exactly the same way on local development machines, but also on the CI server and with Octopus deploy. And yes, there's a typo, sorry for that. Yeah, so I do have another option. Go on or finish now. Okay, I'm speeding up. So yeah, just another overview. I mean, you've seen a lot of mention it. That's basically everything we need to automate our processes. And just to give you a brief insight on how that looks when we work together, it's basically we are doing pull requests on our Bitbucket server, which is also very important to our process. It's the place where we do the first stage of quality assurance, basically. And it's important because it's all quite automated, right? It's automated to the place where we do not finish releases on the Git command line. We're using Git flow, but we do not have the right to commit to the master branch. So how can you close release branches or any of that stuff if you do not have write access to the master branch? Well, what we have is we have a service user that we have configured, which has write access or push writes on master branch, and we do have a button which is called finish release, and it picks up the release branch and merges it into master. So it's a push of a button. And yeah, it's also somehow a workaround to the fact that if you really want a consistent and nobody should commit to the mainline and stable version, it has to be somehow automated. Maybe one time we do that through a chatbot. That would be really nice. Some other steps we have split them up, is build and test the solution. This should run no more than 5 to 6, maybe 7 minutes. We honestly did have issues with a way too complex build configuration. So we had builds running for 10 to 15 minutes, which is just way too long if you just build on any commit. So you have to make sure that you have one process that is really quick to get immediate feedback, because that's what we want as developer, right? If we push something, we would like to have immediate feedback if the code still works. And we've a bit struggling with that as well. And then we have a build deployment package. That's the process of packing everything up to make it ready in NuGet packages for Octopus deploy. Publish release is, well, just doing that, publishing it to Octopus deploy, and for some automation also on the dev servers. We do have different stages for different projects, but this one is basically scheduled to regularly deploy on one system. And as mentioned, we have Octopus deploy. We do have quite a lot of steps in Octopus deploy. We could do it smaller, so it's always a bit a trade-off of using the product features or implementing something by itself. For example, the Sitecore installation framework comes already with tasks for starting and stopping the IAS. So there would not be no need to really stop the application pool and then somewhere down below start it again. On the contrary, it interferes a bit, right? The process is not compliant, so we have to just probably get rid of those steps or skip them in the installation framework, which is then something you have to choose. That's the NuGet feed, and yes, it's basically redundant. Just for one exception, we still need a distribution. So our plan with Sitecore 9 is to have the WDP package, packing it up in a NuGet package, because NuGet is really nice. It has versioning, and it's a good transport mechanism, and after all, it's just a zip file, so it's also easy to then extract it and do operations on the web deploy package that Sitecore ships. So it's basically just another way of accessing it and working with it. So we can then download it by requesting a specific version of that package, which is why we will still keep this system in place. So that's how the Swiss guys or the French guys call it. So merci vielmals. Thank you for listening. And not too many. Una is waiting. But at least she's comfy at home.
Yes, so usually when we are talking about CI and CD, we are also talking about some connection with issue tracking. Do you have this integration with issue tracking system?
To be honest, the only integration with the issue tracking system we have is that we're using Jira from Atlassian also, so we're hooking in the branching status into the Jira tickets. So we are not creating alerts on failed builds in a tracking system, for example. We are feeding back the failed builds to Slack channels and to email on one project. So one project, there you get just emails in the inbox if a deployment fails, and I think more than 2 or 3 use Slack. Is that what you were referring to by hooking up the? Yeah.
Just one question from me. Maybe I'm overlooked that in your presentation, but what was behind that decision to build own a tool to actually, do all that stuff? I guess most people would use just gulp scripts. Maybe something is wrong with them. I don't know. So why you decided to actually build a Bob the Builder?
Yeah. Actually, Bob the Builder started way before Habitat was born and before Gulp was even available for Visual Studio. So I think we've open sourced the whole commit history. So we can go and look back for more than 2.5, 3 years. Not very sure how long. Yeah, so one thing it was definitely not that well supported in Visual Studio. And the other is that, well, Gulp, it's a task-based system to do stuff. We could have used Psake. Psake was already there. Beaver from CAM was already there, which is a task-based system. But by that, actually, when you look at our machines and the process, by now we have we don't really need a task-based systems because there's not that many steps following each other. So basically, what I'm saying, the installation of Sitecore, it would be the ideal part for the task-based system. So that's what I guess why Sitecore created the task-based framework, and they have a bunch of steps and then they're through. Yes, fully agree. We could have gone with a task-based system there. We just didn't want the dependency, I guess. So it's not a big deal. It's not really complex what we've done there. Everything else is maybe we could have done that. For example, on the TeamSit we have we started with about 14 steps, 14 different build steps to build, test, download dependencies, create serialization packages, etc. So we decided to go with a lot of out-of-the-box functionality for TeamCity and did not script that. And to be honest, since I'm using AppWare heavily also with open sourcing Bob, I'm really a fan of having the build configuration in the source. And that would definitely require more task-based approaches there. And yeah, it could be that we're now just extending Sitecore installation framework.
Is your site available during the production deployment? And if yes, how do you ensure that?
Yeah, we always have at least 2 delivery instances, and we're taking one off the load balancer. I'm not sure if you see this on the screenshot up here. No, sorry, actually not. But one of the maybe no. There's first because that's a simple. That's our vibes. That's our block. That's actually our only Sitecore instance that has no redundancy. So, but usually we have one step here, taking the node that we deploy out of the load balancer, and then do the deployment and activate it later. And that also includes some delay. You need to degrade this. Basically, the information from the API from the load balancer that we get is how many connections are still open to that delivery server. And we wait to go down to a threshold of 10 or 15% at the moment, I guess. You cannot wait to have 0 connections open to one delivery server. That's not going to happen. But we cut the connection from the delivery server on a threshold of about 10 to 15%, and then take it offline, do the deployment, take it online, and take the other one down.
Okay. No more questions? Then we can thank our presenter, Reto, Hugi, and I'm sure we'll have some more questions later. He's available today, all the evening. Okay.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
And we need just 1 minute for, or 2 minutes for Una to set up the presentation. We'll see her online, so don't go too far. Okay.